time of trouble and follow our lead. On the other hand, we have divisive and dangerous rhetoric of an untested candidate, Donald Trump. Now, I don't need to twist or spin Donald Trump's words at all. Because once Americans hear his words, just as he said them, they'll reach the same conclusion that national security leaders, Democrats, Republicans, and independents have reached. Donald Trump is unqualified and temperamentally unfit to serve as President of the United States and America's Commander-in-Chief. Donald Trump trash talks our own military and those who sacrifice for it, including John McCain, an American hero and POW. He picked a fight with a Virginia Gold Star family whose son died saving his fellow soldiers. He has a bizarre fascination with strong men and authoritarian leaders in countries that are no allies of the United States. And with respect to our allies, he would toss alliances aside and says he wants to, quote, take everything back from the world that we've given to them. Trump has offered empty promises and divisive rhetoric. Under his leadership, we would be unrecognizable to the rest of the world, and we would be far less safe. I want to compare Hillary Clinton's views to Donald Trump by looking at three areas of the world. Let's start by looking at the Middle East. Hillary Clinton understands that our security depends on finding ways to address a rising tide of extremism across this wide arc of instability. Working with allies to defeat ISIS, countering Iran's continued aggression, and defending the State of Israel. In a region that's fraught with challenges, there's no substitute for building strong relationships. That's why I've helped lead congressional delegations to Turkey, Kuwait, Jordan, Lebanon, Egypt, Iraq, the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. During 3 trips to Turkey, I've met with government officials, U.S. troops, civil society, and religious groups to talk about the threats posed by ISIS. We visited a city not far from the Syrian border, ISIS-controlled territory, and met with Syrian refugees. And over the course of 5 trips to Israel, I've discussed everything from missile defense to human rights to economic cooperation. Now, meetings and experiences like these on the ground and in the room give you essential knowledge about the people and places that impact the safety of America. Hillary has that. She's been sitting across those tables for years. And Hillary's on a first-name basis with virtually every head of state in the region. That's one reason she was able to facilitate a ceasefire in Gaza between Israel and Hamas and twist enough arms to put sanctions in place on Iran, leading then to a diplomatic breakthrough on Iran's nuclear program. And it's how she's put forward a serious plans to defeat ISIS, enforce the Iranian nuclear agreement, and ensure that Israel's future as a democratic and Jewish state is secure. Donald Trump doesn't have credible plans for these challenges. Apparently, he doesn't have a lot of use for real-world experience either. He says most of his knowledge comes from reality TV. He says he, quotes, gets his insight from, quote, the shows on cable news. He may claim to know it all, but on Middle East policy, he's been all over the map. There's only one thing that's consistent: how dangerous his ideas and rhetoric really are. Let's look at Iraq. In Trump's first campaign speech, he claimed that he'd had the foresight to say, quote, don't hit Iraq because you're going to completely destabilize the Middle East. That's what he said back in 2001, 2002. It's one of the main rationales for his candidacy, and it's completely made up. Donald Trump was clearly in favor of the war in Iraq. In 2000, well before the invasion, he said, quote, if we decide against Iraq as necessary, it's madness not to carry the mission to its conclusion. In 2002, Trump told national security expert Howard Stern that he was still in favor of going into Iraq. In 2003, he said that the war looked like it had been, quote, a tremendous success. And in 2004, given the information that President Bush had, he might have made the same decision to invade. Now, these days, he rails against the decisions to pull troops out of Iraq, a decision set in motion by the Bush administration, claiming that that decision led to the creation of ISIS. But folks, here's the problem. In 2006, Trump said we weren't pulling our troops out of Iraq fast enough. He said we should, quote, get out of Iraq as quickly as possible. There's no escaping these facts. Donald Trump has misled the American people over and over about his position on Iraq. He was for evading Iraq, and then he decided he wasn't. He was for leaving Iraq, and then he decided he wasn't. He says whatever he feels like at any given time, because you can do that when you're a TV star. But you can't do that when you're the President of the United States. He's doing the same thing with Libya. Nowadays, Trump says he was never in favor of taking action there. At a GOP debate, he made the incredible claim that he had never even discussed the subject in public. Trump is misleading us here, too. Back in 2011, when the U.S. was weighing whether to intervene in Libya, Trump said that because its leader, Muammar Gaddafi, was killing thousands of his own people, America had to act. He went on NBC, and he said that if he were president, he'd create a militarily imposed no-fly zone to protect innocent Libyans. Now, if that sounds a lot like the policy that President Obama and Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State supported, that's because it is the policy that President Obama and Hillary Clinton supported. Except instead of playing an armchair general on the Today Show, Hillary was in Paris engaging in furious round-the-clock diplomacy with the G8, with the Arab League, and with representatives of the Libyan transitional government to put that no-fly zone in place. Her relentless efforts led to a UN resolution, a coalition air campaign that saw zero loss of American lives, and that ended Gaddafi's slaughter of innocent people. It sounds like Trump should have been pretty pleased with that outcome, right? Nope. Donald Trump apparently now thinks, quote, we would be so much better off, close quote, if Gaddafi were still in charge of Libya. And yet, by Trump's own admission, Gaddafi was a man who, again, quote, knocked a Pan Am airplane out of the sky. This is not a good man. This is not a sane man. But Gaddafi was a man who Donald was happy to do business with. Not to put too fine a point on this, but just 2 years before 2011, when Muammar Gaddafi was set to visit the United Nations, and no one would let him stay in New York, Trump allowed Gaddafi to set up an elaborate tent at his Westchester County estate. That's right, when Gaddafi was looking for a place to stay in America, and because of his human rights track record and the Pan Am bombing, others were turning him away. He found one guy who was willing to host him, Donald J. Trump. You were saying something about judgment, Donald? Let's look at Iran. Thanks in part to global sanctions, a global sanctions coalition that Hillary Clinton assembled, President Obama ultimately achieved a historic agreement that put a lid on Iran's nuclear program without firing a single shot. I worked hard on this in Congress out of a belief that we have to exhaust diplomacy. We have to, before we contemplate other alternatives. I worked across the aisle with the Republican chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Republican Senator Bob Corker, to craft a bill that set up a constructive process for congressional review of an Iran deal. That process ultimately improved the deal by strengthening our hand in negotiations instead of undercutting it through partisan politics. But we have no idea how Donald Trump would handle Iran, and frankly, neither does he. To try to figure out what his plan would be about Iran, conservative host Yu had asked him how he would deal with the Quds Force, which is the aggressive Iranian military units that actively undermine our interests in Iraq and Syria. Trump